Today we're going to be celebrating National Brother Day, and what better person to personify the perfect brother than the character David Rose from Schitt's Creek, played by Daniel Levy. In honor of this, I'm wearing black and white with an awkward embellishment. Ooh, before I forget, it would be great if you subscribed and if you rang the bell so that you can be alerted to when I have new videos up. And if you could just like this video for me, please, that would be awesome. Before we even begin, start thinking about your favorite quotes from Schitt's Creek and write them below. If you're new here, my name is Michelle Pava. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and you know what? I don't like when people hurt you. I don't like the BS that you might have to go through, so I thought I would create a YouTube channel to help people get out of the BS and find some sanity and to celebrate life. So welcome to the Sanity Soiree. So I wanted to do something really special for National Brothers Day for those of us who have brothers and want to celebrate this day. And I kept thinking about, who is someone that we all know, or most of us know, and that person would have to also exemplify what a good brother is. And then I thought David Rose from Schitt's Creek. And you might be a little surprised about that at first, because a lot of people on the surface would see David Rose as someone who is maybe a little dysfunctional, a little narcissistic. But hear me out on why David Rose from Schitt's Creek is an absolute perfect poster child for who a functional brother should be. Before we actually begin, let's just talk about what brothers are. Brothers are often our first playmates. They teach us to stand up for ourselves. We learn to get a little bit of a thicker skin because we have a brother. And the sibling relationship can echo throughout our adulthood. So if you had a good and functional relationship with your brother, you probably have better relationships in general, especially with the men in your life. If you had a struggling relationship, a challenging relationship, or a downright toxic relationship with your brother growing up, you might have a harder time with choosing different types of individuals that will be very positive for you. If you have a negative relationship with your brother, you could have lifelong depression, anxiety, or even a sense of being disconnected. However, if you have a high intimacy, low conflict relationship with your brother, a more cordial relationship, even in your teen years and early adulthood, you are more apt to have a higher intimacy level with all of the men in your life because you've learned how to trust another male. Just for the sake of testosterone alone, we often learn a lot of leadership skills from our brothers and also how to stand up for ourselves and how to speak our mind. So let's talk about how David Rose overcomes a lot of the struggles that he might have had with his parents and himself, and how he evolved as a character and as a brother. Now we understand the family dynamic early on where dad is working a lot, mom has her own career, they're very wealthy, everyone is sort of living in this castle, but everyone is very much to themselves. There's not a lot of connection, and there's not a lot of supporting each other and helping each other to be very independent. David didn't have a driver's license. The mother didn't know Alexis's middle name. There's lots of examples of how they had neglect and how they really didn't develop into competent adults. Now, when we're looking at David Rose and Alexis, we're seeing these adults, but we're also seeing the child within and the teenager within. So really, it's sort of like there are teenagers in adult bodies, but aren't we all? But seriously, we are. So when you were 5 years old, you didn't just suddenly leave the first 5 years behind and you were 6 years old. That's not the way it works. You evolve every single day, every single minute. So you are the accumulation of everything that you've been and every experience you've had. So when you see David Rose in his 30s, you're seeing everything from his past. And this is why we really like them. Even though there's a lot of abrasiveness that we on the surface see, we know that deep down, these are two individuals that are struggling. And specifically David Rose, we see him as almost childlike in the very beginning of the show. In the very first scene, just speaking of the siblings, we see these two superficial people who have everything materialistic being taken away from them. And that's all they seem to care about in that moment. They're in a trauma, they're in a crisis, and they're in shock. Very soon after, when they go to the hotel, we see them fighting about who's going to be closer to the door because no one wants the bed that's closer to the door because they're afraid of getting murdered. This is actually the first glimpse that we get of their true vulnerability. It has nothing to do with money. It has to do with feeling secure. Right from the beginning, we know that these are two very vulnerable people, and we see David as a little bit more vulnerable. We see the first taste of sibling rivalry that looks very preteen with, you get murdered first, no, you get murdered first, which is very funny, but it does speak of a preteen type of an attitude. So we see this and we're looking at a comedy, but deep down, we're understanding that this is very childlike behavior. And that's sort of what makes it funny. Now, he often questions her personal life. He brings up ex-boyfriends and different behaviors that she's had, but he never actually shames her, blames her. He never guilts her. We don't really see the behaviors that are truly narcissistic and malignant or psychopathic. We just see a selfish guy who's a little bit vulnerable. Well, a lot vulnerable. Now, through all of the skits, the scenes, the comedy, all of the overly dramatic behaviors, we do see many glimpses of warmth that you may or may not have noticed. So for instance, when he's having that whole meltdown and he thinks he's having a heart attack and it's really a panic attack, she's actually calming him down quite a bit. So that's where you see the sibling rivalry, but also the closeness. Do you remember the scene where he runs away and she says that she didn't answer that one text? But the reality is she knew that he was going to be okay. He's a grown man. So really think about in your own life, whether it was you or your siblings, when did you maybe act out or see your siblings acting out and it wasn't about what was on the surface? It was something deeper underneath. Think about that and share it. I'd like to hear about it. Comment below. Now, I feel things changed for him when he met Patrick, because this is when he started to have his needs met more. It actually started really when he got his first job, when he started doing something on his own. But I really feel like it really went into high gear when he meets Patrick. You're used to having your brother right there with you, and then all of a sudden he meets someone and he becomes sort of what we think is another person. I've heard this a lot in the therapy room, but this is super healthy because the fact that he's able to meet someone else, the fact that he's able to go on and separate a little bit, especially as an adult, is very healthy. And people can only separate in a healthy way when they have the healthy background. And people separate in a healthy way when they start to get their needs met and they feel confident enough to be their own person. So a healthy relationship with your brother, with any sibling, is going to have some level of conflict. You need to differentiate yourself, but at the same time, you also need to show warmth. You need to show a level of respect. And when I think back, I think every scene had some level of warmth, even though there was a high level of conflict as well. Now, during the entire series, David is always having an issue with boundaries, and he's always afraid to take a risk and to just live. So everything about him is very niche. So he's dressing a certain way. He has a certain type of an art gallery in New York. He has a certain type of an apartment. Everything about him is very closed in. And it's not until he's living in this hotel and meets these different cast of characters, literally, that are bringing him out of his shell and showing him a new life that he begins to question himself and question his perception of himself, really. But in the progression of the show, David Rose does not want the negative people in his life, and he's only gravitating towards the more positive people, but he does so very cautiously. He even says specifically at one point, I'm trying very hard to not connect with people right now. So a lot of what he says out loud are things that we sometimes already think. Like for instance, when he was learning the difference between a shower and a sprinkle, and his comment, that's the stupidest I ever heard, is actually hysterical. And we get it. We think it's funny because we understand why he thinks it's so crazy. We can see through his eyes and we bond it with that character, not just because he's funny, not just because he's popular, but because we saw a lot of ourselves in him early on. And it continued and continued every single show. Almost every scene. We imagine that we could sit down with that character and have a conversation and laugh, and he would bring out this other side of us. And often that is what a brother does for us. And for those of you who are lucky enough to have a positive relationship with your brother, that's what a brother does. Now, there was one episode that was really highlighting the vulnerability and the sibling rivalry and the warmth between them, was the episode where he was talking about the Tamagotchis. Alexis was supposed to take care of them. She killed them. He never let it go. This is very typical of what I used to see in the therapy room, where people would come into the therapy room, or one person would come in and they would be very angry at their sibling or at someone, and they would tell me why, and it was always something that was a little superficial like that. But of course, underneath of it, there's so much more. So that was really not so much about the Tamagotchis. This was about he trusted her and she fell through. And this was really about the first time that maybe he had broken trust. So we understand during all of this that he is very sensitive, and he covers it up with this aloofness. Also, tell me about your relationship with your brother, and is he like David Rose, or is he the opposite of David Rose? So as you can see, there are endless examples of how David Rose is the perfect brother, the brother that you wish you had. So David Rose, wherever you are, happy National Brothers Day. If you want to watch me rip apart Breakfast at Tiffany's, that's next.